It's a clash of titans as Wesley So takes on Magnus Carlsen, two of the world's absolute best, and every point is critical in this high-stakes tournament. Let's dive in. So opens with the pawn to e4, and Carlsen responds with the Sicilian defense. This is the can variation, and we see very standard, solid development from both sides as they stake their claims in the center. Wesley So signals his plan with pawn to g3, preparing to fianchetto his bishop, while Magnus immediately challenges in the center with pawn to d5. And here, in the center, Magnus makes the first small slip of the game. He's facing a complex decision, and his choice isn't the most accurate. The much stronger try was... Pawn takes the pawn on e4, forcing a queen trade on d8 after the check. The king recaptures, the knight develops to c3, and pawn to f5 follows. But in the game, Magnus plays knight out to f6, and while it looks natural, it lets white off the hook and gives away the early advantage. The central pawns are exchanged, and both players continue with straightforward development. Bishops come out, and both kings are safely castled away to the king side. We enter the middle game. The position is quiet for now, as both players maneuver their pieces, improve their coordination, and prepare for the complex battle ahead. Rooks are developed, and small pawn moves are made to control key squares. The final quiet moves are played. The white king tucks away to h2, and the black bishop repositions to d6, the calm before the storm, and so breaks the tension with a brilliant sacrifice. Knight leaps to d4, a fantastic move designed to shatter black's pawn structure and rip open lines for an attack. Carlsen is forced to accept the sacrifice, recapturing on d4. So takes back with the bishop, and Magnus immediately challenges it with his own bishop to c5. Incredible! So offers another sacrifice. Knight to e2, a second brilliant move, refusing to back down and keeping the pressure at maximum to maintain the initiative. Carlsen accepts the trade, taking the bishop on d4. So recaptures with his knight, and Magnus activates his queen, bringing it to b6 to create counterplay on the queen side. White's position is still very dynamic, but he has to be precise. The pressure on the queen side is real, and So's next move is an inaccuracy. The better way was to defend directly. Rook to b1 immediately challenges black's plans. After bishop to d7, white can trade rooks on e8 with check, black recaptures, and pawn to c3 solidifies everything. But instead of that, So plays the rook up to e3, and this allows Magnus to seize the initiative. Now we see a long period of maneuvering. Pieces are shuffling back and forth, with both players trying to find the right plan. Black holds a slight nagging edge throughout. A surprising slip from Magnus. Knight to g5 is an inaccuracy that misses a huge opportunity. He had a chance to create decisive threats, but instead, this gives the advantage right back to white, and So has a golden opportunity to punish that mistake and win the game on the spot. The winning idea was a forceful sequence starting with rook takes rook on e8 with check, the black rook must recapture, pawn pushes to h4, the knight is forced to h3 with check, and the bishop simply takes it. Back in the actual game, though, So misses it, playing his rook to b3 instead, and just like that the chance is gone, and the advantage swings back to Carlsen. A flurry of mistakes from both sides. Now we see them repeat moves, almost as if they're taking a moment to catch their breath and recalculate after that dramatic turn of events. White finally plays pawn to c3, shoring up the queen side, while black repositions the knight back to f6, looking for a new angle of attack. The position remains tense, but here, So makes another slip. His knight move is too passive and allows black to build up a dangerous initiative. A better approach was to simplify. Rook takes rook on e8 with check, black recaptures, and after queen to b3, the queens come off the board and the knight takes on b3. But in the game, So opts for knight to c2, and this gives Carlsen the opening he's been looking for, and Carlsen pounces immediately. Bishop to f5, a powerful developing move that puts major pressure on white's position. So defends with rook to f3, but it's another mistake. This allows black to execute a winning tactic that will win material. There it is, bishop to e4. The key move in the combination, and white is completely tied down. White is in deep, deep trouble, and this next move is the final decisive blunder. He needed to find the most stubborn defense possible. Rook back to e3 was the only try. After pawn to d4, the rook would take the bishop on e4, the knight recaptures, and the knight takes the pawn on d4. But the move in the game, rook to f4, walks directly into a crushing blow that ends the game on the spot. And here comes the execution. Carlsen pushes his pawn to g5, forcing white's hand, and So has no choice but to capture. And now, a brilliant sacrifice. The pawn recaptures on g5, shattering white's kingside defense wide open. Here's the deadly point. If the rook takes the knight on f6, the queen simply recaptures, and after queen to d2, the pawn pushes to d4. The rest is a matter of technique for Magnus Carlsen. White captures the bishop on e4, but after black recaptures, the position collapses. Pieces are traded, and black simplifies into a completely winning endgame. The game is already lost for So, but his next move only speeds up the inevitable. A more stubborn defense was needed. Pawn to b4 was a better try. Even after rook to d3, pawn to a4, rook back to d8, and pawn to c5 could put up more of a fight. Instead, So plays rook to e1, which allows black's rook to infiltrate immediately and decisively, and the rook crashes into d3. The game is effectively over. So tries one last trick with knight to g4, hoping to muddy the waters. But Magnus is ice-cold, finding the only move to keep his winning advantage. Knight takes knight on g4, shutting down all counterplay. The queen recaptures on g4, but black's rook lands on the dominant d4 square, and white's position is hopeless. And just when it seems completely over, a moment of imprecision from Magnus. He's still winning, but this gives white a glimmer of hope. The cleaner path was king to g7, and after bishop to f1, the king walks up to g6, queen to e3, and the f-pawn starts rolling. But in the game, he pushes the pawn to e3, which gives white the chance to trade queens and escape the worst of the pressure. The final chance for Wesley. So, he can force a queen trade and fight for a draw in the endgame. The critical move was obvious. Queen takes the pawn on e3. The queens must be exchanged, the pawn recaptures, and after rook takes c4, the bishop takes on b7. Instead, in a shocking final mistake, he recaptures with his pawn on e3, and this allows black's queen to deliver the knockout blow. And there it is. The queen swoops in and takes the pawn on g3. This wins more material and completely destroys white's king position. It's all over now. And at this point, Wesley So resigns. An absolutely wild game full of brilliant sacrifices and stunning blunders, but in the end, Magnus Carlsen takes the win. So resigned because he's down material in a totally hopeless position. Here's one simple demonstration of black's dominance. If the pawn takes the rook on d4, the rook takes the queen on e2, and white's rook recaptures, the queen lands on d3, and there's no stopping black's attack.